Hi, I'm Michael Stittle.
And I'm Nick Nanos.
And this is Trendline. So we're back, Nick. January 2020. New look for the Prime Minister, but not for us. But first, I want to get started with the Conservative leadership race has barely begun, and we already have people dropping out.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at the national ballot trend, and it's still a tight race between the Liberals and the Conservatives. We have the Liberals at 34, Conservatives at 31, NDP at 16. And, so it's for all intents and purposes a very tight race nationally. And then now we've got this leadership race, kind of like, it's started, but it hasn't started. We've had Jean Charest this week drop out. We had another individual, Brian Brulotte, who was a party outsider, I'll call him, announce and then step out, both because of the rules. This leadership race is going to be of critical importance for the Conservatives if they want to have a chance to try to oust the Liberals, because when we look at our polling numbers, it's like, you go to the prairies. I think the Conservatives are at like 60% in the prairies, and the Liberals are in the teens. But what the Conservatives need, they need a leader that has appeal specifically in Ontario, most important Ontario, but also to a lesser extent in Quebec. So where's the winning the winning strategy for the Conservatives? They need to think of someone that can grow the Conservative potential in order for them to challenge the Liberals.
It seems to me we're almost seeing this old Reform Party, Progressive Conservative Party split again. So obviously Jean Charest would be the old Progressive Conservative side, but then we've got Pierre Poilievre, and he's backed by some old Harper era people, John Baird and Jenny Byrne, representing maybe the old Harper Reform Party. We're still waiting if Rona Ambrose, will enter the race. Is there a sort of a party split there?
Well, I'm not sure if we would call it a split, but the thing is that like all parties, the Liberals are a broad tent. There are blue Liberals and red Liberals. The Conservatives are really no different. There are more right-wing Conservatives and there are more progressive Conservatives from the old Progressive Conservative Party. I thought it was quite interesting that former Prime Minister Stephen Harper stepped off the PC Canada Fund in order to free himself to be more active in the leadership. Michael, you talked about us being back. Well, it sounds like Stephen Harper's back.
Oh, yeah.
He's been the architect of this new Conservative Party, right? He presided over the merger between the Progressive Conservatives and the Canadian Alliance / Reform Party. He was the first leader of the newly merged party. He obviously has an interest in making sure, from his perspective, that it's viable and can win, and he wants to have more latitude. Another person we haven't mentioned and hasn't been in the news as much would be James Moore from British Columbia.
Right.
He's another person whose name has been floated out there. He would be another very credible potential candidate to add to the mix. But it's been more about candidates dropping out. And we've got Peter MacKay back. And remember, Peter didn't run for the leadership. Peter MacKay didn't run for the leadership against Stephen Harper. So he's back.
And he seems to be the biggest figure in this race so far, and he's obviously representing the old Progressive Conservative Party, for which he used to be the leader.
Yeah.
And he was also, right after the Conservatives' election loss, he was one of the first people to jump in and criticize Andrew Scheer.
Yeah. And, well, you know what, Michael? I was at the event where he didn't he criticized Andrew Scheer, but it was more of disappointment with the outcome of the election, and that's when he made the comment about not scoring on an empty net. So I was at that event. I didn't see it as a personal criticism of Scheer, but more an articulation of a disappointment with the last federal election. But when we look at Peter MacKay, he has significant public profile. He's the former leader of the Progressive Conservatives. But that said, under the newly merged party, and when Stephen Harper won the leadership and formed the government, Peter MacKay was a solid cabinet minister and a team player.
Right.
Even though he was the leader of the former Progressive Conservatives. So, he's, he would come from that wing of the party, But the reality is that he was a pretty solid cabinet minister under Stephen Harper. So it's an interesting mix. But I think the Liberals are watching this closely because the thing is for the Liberals, they're looking at those seats in Ontario. The Conservatives, if they want to be competitive, have to do well in Ontario. When Stephen Harper won, it was because he had a rock solid base in the West, was competitive in the Ontario, and picked up a few seats in Quebec. That's realistically the winning franchise and the winning strategy, at least, for the federal Conservative Party.
Now, just to go back to Jean Charest, again, he dropped out this week, even before he really entered the race. In his outgoing statement, he said that he was concerned about political divisions or regional divisions in Canada. But he also made a point of saying that, I'm going to quote him here, on environmental issues, the CPC must offer Canadians a credible and ambitious plan in regard to the management of our natural resources and the fight against climate change. One does not exclude the other. So which of these candidates might step into that void, do you think, and have a more of a environmentally friendly message, I suppose?
Well, it's hard to tell, but the thing is that it's pretty clear that Alberta. I think when we think of the heart and soul of the party, for those Conservative members in the province of Alberta, they really want to ensure that Canada has some sort of vision that includes developing resources, and that hopefully tries to reconcile kind of environmental aspirations. But you have to remember, for Jean Charest, he's the former Minister of the Environment under Brian Mulroney. I think if I remember correctly, he was kind of involved in the Rio round. Very successful on that front. One of the candidates that probably people would expect to be more pro-environment would probably be Peter MacKay because of his progressive conservative roots. In the same way that people would expect any candidates from the West to likely tilt in favor of energy, resource, jobs, and those types of issues.
Now, where are we with the preferred PM numbers? Is Trudeau still kind of low from the election, or is he bounced back up? Or
well, he's right now, and we have to be careful because we have Andrew Scheer in the mix, but Trudeau's at around 33%. Scheer, who's now the the interim leader, is at around 20. He had a little bit of a bounce post-election, but his numbers have been going down over the last few weeks. Actually, what's happened in the last number of weeks is that the proportion of Canadians that are unsure has increased to 21%. And to put this into context, during the election, it was only 12%. So, what we saw, was that Andrew Scheer's numbers went up during the election and then dropped and has been dropping since he's stepped down. So, but the key takeaway here is that people aren't flocking to Justin Trudeau, even with Andrew Scheer stepping down. They're moving into the unsure category by and large.
Now, as for the Prime Minister, he's spotting a new look. It's a new year, new look for the guy. I guess we would be remiss if we didn't discuss that.
Are you talking about the beard?
I am.
And do you have a declaration to make?
Are you going to out me on this podcast?
I think we should ask who on this podcast has a beard? Not me. That's Nick Nano's talking.
Yes, I do. I, Michael Siddle, do have a beard.
Okay.
I am on Team Beard. I support my fellow beardos. That's all I'm going to say. But I have a conflict of interest,
That's
so
good.
I should not engage in this debate.
Well, so I'm glad that you're an ethical journalist. So I think for the Liberals, when you happen to be the Prime Minister, there is nothing that you do by chance. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a reason. And I think what we're looking at is a reboot. The Liberals trying to reboot Justin Trudeau's brand. In the same way that in 2015 it was sunny ways and positive and happy and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty clear that 2020, the Liberals want to remake or reframe or refocus the Prime Minister to be more, more serious, more focused, and that's part of what I'll say the rebrand. But we shouldn't read too much into facial hair. I hate even talking about these types of issues, but I think it's no, but I think it's just of note.
Yeah.
I'd always kind of say of note, right? So
Right.
for the Liberals, it's pretty clear that they're just trying to send a message that this is a new and different Justin Trudeau, that there's something a little different, and they're trying to basically send a signal.
And they're away on a caucus retreat currently in Manitoba, where they're trying to get Brian Pallister to help them ease tensions with the West, I suppose. Is there any strategy do you think that they should be pursuing?
Well, I think it's jobs, jobs, jobs. There's still a significant amount of anxiety about the future strength of the Canadian economy, even though the macroeconomic numbers look relatively solid on the jobs front. And the thing is that people are still worried about jobs. And when we look at the prairies, like I said before, the Conservatives, I think in our tracking are at around 61% in the prairies, and the Liberals are at 16 or 17%. And for the Liberals to win, they would probably want to try to pick up a couple seats in the West, because for all intents and purposes, being shut out of a couple provinces robs them of the ability to claim to be a national government. Parties always want to win seats in every region, because it makes it easier for forming cabinet. It makes it easier for their deliberations and saying that they listen to Canadians. So I think for the Liberals, having their caucus retreat in Manitoba is a bit of neutral territory, because once you get into Saskatchewan and Alberta, the Canadians that live in those two provinces are definitely not on board. Winnipeg is probably the friendliest part of the prairies, at least for the
Friendly Manitoba.
Yes, friendly.
There you
Yeah,
go.
at least compared to Saskatchewan and Alberta,
Right.
from a Liberal perspective.
And let's not forget, Nick, Chrystia Freeland, now the Deputy Prime Minister. We've seen her on the front lines a lot. What's her role in terms of these regional divisions?
Well, it's pretty clear that what the Prime Minister wants to do is to deploy Chrystia Freeland to help mend and guide the Federation. She did by all accounts, everyone recognized that she did about as well as anyone could do in her dealings with the Trump administration, and navigating in that environment. And now what it looks like the Prime Minister is hoping for is that she can replicate that at the national scene. Because right now, federal provincial relations right now is pretty tense. You've got some openly hostile premiers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. It's not as much of a friendly atmosphere for the Liberals as it was back in 2015, when there were oodles of provincial Liberal governments right across the country. And putting Chrystia Freeland there is probably a signal that federal provincial relations is important, and that he's hoping that Chrystia Freeland can make headway in the same way that she made headway in foreign affairs.
So, Nick, what's your big takeaway this week? And you can talk about the beard if you want.
Yeah. Big takeaway is the Conservative leadership. I think Canadians will take an interest. You have to remember, the Liberals only won just a little more than 30, low 30s in terms of the popular support. So, 2/3 of Canadians voted against them, and 2/3 of Canadians will probably take an interest in who becomes the next leader of the Conservative Party, whether it's a stay the course, Stephen Harper, Andrew Scheer type candidate, or whether it's a candidate that is more progressive. And I think everybody's going to be fixated on the Conservative leadership race. And, for the Conservatives, they have to make sure that not only do they put on a good show, but that they don't come out divided. Because if the Conservative Party looks like it's divided, people will think if they can't even get their act together and be united behind a candidate that can have a good win, people will think that they're not ready to rule, and not ready in terms of being a government in waiting.
And Nick, where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter at Nik Nanos, or on the web at www.nanos.co.
And I'm at Michael Stittle. Thank you very much for listening. And this episode was produced by Trevor Coral, Jesse Taharali, and Phil Hahn. Our executive producer is Liz Travers. Sound editing was done by Jesse Taharelli. This show is hosted by Nick Nanos and myself, Michael Stittle. As always, thanks for listening.